Hey guys, 2020 has been an absolutely off the chart year in every respect. But first time gun ownership and gun ownership in general, but first time gun ownership, it's off the charts. Women make up a huge chunk of that demographic. People of color make up a huge chunk of that demographic. But regardless of race or gender, those numbers are through the roof. We've never seen numbers like this for first time gun ownership. What I want to do here today is talk about some of the basic things to look for. I'm not going to tell you what to buy because I don't think that's right. The only person who knows what's right for you is you. So it's our job to disseminate the type of information to help you make an educated guess and to get you to a point where you've narrowed it down yourself to where you can go try these things out in the field and see what fits you. What I've done is I've broken it down into 4 basic categories of handguns. And again, I'm covering handguns and pistols today. We'll go into shotguns and rifles later on, but specifically today I'm going to talk about handguns. Now, I'm not necessarily breaking it down too small at that lower level where it's either for concealed carry or home defense. I'm talking about if you are a first-time gun owner and you're buying a pistol for the first time for general use, for general self-defense, these are the things to look out for. Again, you can split hairs and go down these rabbit holes in all kinds of other ways to narrow it down into what you're looking for. First thing I'm going to talk about is revolvers. You know how I know that a person doesn't know much about handguns, pistols, or guns in general, is whenever a female asks, what do you think the gun is that I should get to carry? What do you think I should purchase for myself? And somebody says, you need a revolver. That tells me right off the bat that this person does not have much of a background in firearms, if any, and they are simply repeating what they have heard, because that is some of the worst advice I've ever heard. Yes, revolvers are simple. Revolvers are pretty darn reliable in terms of not a whole lot to break on them. The problem is round count. The round count is horrible on these things. This one here, 5 rounds. You're usually going to find most of your revolvers, if it's any kind of a self-defense round that you want to hold, you're going to find that your revolvers are going to carry between 5 and 6 of a decent enough round to use for self-defense. I don't think revolvers are a good starting point, because one of the things that I find on pistols in general is the simpler you can make the firearm, probably the easier and more attracted that first-time gun owner is going to be to it. And sometimes just the controls and the things that you see on a revolver can be a little bit intimidating, like what does this do or what does that do? I realize that instruction manuals come with all firearms. The problem is instruction manuals are rarely read until somebody has taken a gun apart and can't put it back together or something like that. Most people are going to attempt to use these guns prior to, and I'm certainly not suggesting that, read the instruction manual, but most people are not going to do that. I feel like revolvers can be a little bit intimidating, and again, I'm not a big fan of the round count. However, if this gun fits you and works for you, and not this one specifically, but if a revolver fits you and works for you, then go with a revolver. The next type of handgun that is pretty much out there is a double action. Double actions are good in some respect, actually many respects. I like the fact that they have a double action trigger in some cases, because if you load this thing up, sometimes you can lower that hammer because it has a decocker on it depending on your model, and you can have that thing with one in the chamber, but you don't have an oversensitive trigger. Sometimes you can have a trigger in double action gun, you're actually cocking that hammer. If you have that hammer forward with one in the chamber, you're cocking the hammer with the initial pull of that trigger. So that first pull is a little bit tough. The thing I don't like about double action semi-automatics is the fact that your trigger pulls are not all the same. That first trigger pull is a very long trigger pull, whereas the follow-up trigger pulls are more in that single action neighborhood where they're very light trigger pulls. So if you are faced with a self-defense type situation, you're going to experience 2 very different trigger pulls, very different. The weight is extremely different on those 2 types of trigger pulls. So you may find yourself with that follow-up shot maybe going off when you don't intend it to, because if you're expecting that second shot to be as long and drawn out as that first initial trigger pull, it's not going to be. So there's always that risk that second and third or fourth shot is going to be probably sent down range a little bit faster and unexpectedly. You may not expect to be putting that thing out there. The next type of pistol that I'm a fan of I just don't know about carrying it. Certainly not a first-time gun owner. I don't know about carrying it. Is a 1911, and there's various forms of 1911s. I think everybody that makes a firearm makes a 1911. It's a beautiful gun. It's a classic design. The downside to it is, which is kind of an upside in some circles, is that you usually have a pretty sensitive trigger. Now, you can make these triggers a little bit more difficult to pull, but in general, it is probably the finest trigger that you're going to find on a handgun. Problem with that is I wouldn't say they're all a hair trigger, but you can get them down to a 1.5 pound trigger. But even a 3 and 4 pound 1911 trigger on a nice 1911 is pretty sensitive. And the problem also with that is you're going to probably want to carry that thing cocked and locked. What I mean by that is one in the chamber, the hammer back, and put that thing on safety. I feel like whenever you're faced with a self-defense situation, you've got an adrenaline dump and you're having to do several things, and you are a new gun owner on top of that. Now, this goes for all gun owners, but new gun owners especially, when they're forced into a situation that they're not expecting, your mind now has to make that motor skill and that little thumb now work to pull that thumb safety off. In my humble opinion, I think that is one extra step that you are now having to think about doing prior to actually engaging that threat that's out there. Now, with that being said, we talk about it all the time, and most of your gun guys talk about it. Practice. Obviously, there's no substitute for practice, so if you do want to carry a 1911 and you are familiar with that type of trigger, you need to train yourself with that thumb safety to make sure that you are ready to engage that thumb safety. You've got guys out there, and most of your guys that are shooting competition, a large percentage of them are shooting some type of a 1911 or a 2011 style pistol with that type of John Browning action. It's natural for them to unholster that gun and immediately take it off safety. That's what I shoot in competition. This is my competition gun right here. It's just a natural secondary reaction. The moment you unholster that gun and present it towards your target, you're already, your thumb is taking that safety off. And actually, in some of these guns, it's actually a good idea to ride your thumb on top of that, because you don't run the risk of knocking that safety and re-engaging it during the course of fire. So again, a 1911, a wonderful gun, a timeless gun. I'm a humongous fan. If I had to pick one gun that's my favorite gun out of all of them, it's probably a 1911. I just don't think it's the greatest thing in the world to carry. If it works for you, carry it. That's what you do. The last one I'm going to talk about is basically a striker-fired pistol. There's so many striker-fires on the market. I did not pick this particular one, which is a Glock, for any particular reason, other than it is one of the most common ones out there. One thing that I will say about most of your striker fires out there, and Glock especially, and I'm going to put a video together that's going to talk about why Glocks are so popular, even and especially to first-time gun buyers, they don't overcomplicate the controls. This particular pistol has what I look at as being pretty much four ways that you can engage this weapon, that whatever you do, the owner, the handler of the gun, you manipulate something on the gun. What that is obviously your mag release, your mag catch. You press that button, magazine drops out. Then you've got your your slide catch. Well, that does a couple of things. That's going to either lock the slide back, or if you manipulate it, it's going to bring that slide back forward again. You got your takedown lever over here. Well, that's going to take down the gun itself whenever you're ready to do some cleaning. Of course, last but not least, the trigger. Now, what I like about what Glock has done, maybe accidentally, maybe purposely, all their controls are small but easy to access. They're mostly textured to where when you do access them, they do what they're supposed to do, but they're kind of out of the way. They're not big and bulky, and even like this Beretta here. I know, the Beretta has so many controls on it. It, again, being a double action, decocker, safety, takedown lever. All these things on there can be intimidating to your first-time gun buyer. When they look at that, again, their first impression, if you have both of these guns lying next to one another in a gun case, they're not going to say, can I see the instruction manual for both of these pistols? They're looking at both of them, and they see one with a bunch of controls on it, and they see another one with much fewer controls on it, but they look simpler. They just look so just out there and generic, like, okay, there's no surprises here, where some of these other guns, you're looking at them and you're like, man, what lever do? And it might be a really simple function. Glocks just happen to be one of those pistols that make it easier. Now, most people wonder, what about the safeties? Glock has multiple safeties on it. Technically, they have 3 safeties in here. But the trigger safety is what throws a lot of people off. Oh, it doesn't have an external safety. You don't need an external safety. If you are truly practicing the rules of gun safety, your finger isn't going onto that trigger until you're actually ready to eliminate the threat downrange or shoot at a target. So if you have, again, we're going back to training here, if you have conditioned your mind to always keep that finger off of the trigger, no matter what you're doing, your safety really is right here. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it honestly is. So those are just some things that I want people to think about whenever they're going out and buying guns. I'm not pitching any one of these particular brands. There are so many striker fires out there. If the striker fire is a way for you to go, there's other brands out there that you can take a look at as well that are just as good and just as effective. Glock just has a very long history of reliability and simplicity. The simplicity is one of the biggest things that I can see in terms of guns that you really need to look out for. The next thing I want to talk about real quick, other than the styles of these guns, is caliber. Again, don't let somebody talk you into a caliber that you're not comfortable with. If you narrow it down to a particular gun that you like, that fits your hand good, then you need to figure out what caliber works for you. I will honestly say, just to throw up a little bit of advice here, 9mm are really good in the middle. That's going to be very effective for smaller shooters, mid-sized shooters, or larger shooters. So you cannot really go wrong with a 9mm. Again, I'm not telling you to use that. I'm just saying I'd be surprised if you got a 9mm and you said this wasn't for me. The third and final thing, and it's the most important, and I briefly just touched on it, is fit. You can make the most educated gun purchase in the world, and if you ignore fit and how that gun fits your hand, it may be the worst gun purchase that you've ever made in your life. The gun has to fit your hand. Not only does it have to fit, but this has to be fit around that gun too. What I mean by that is you got to be comfortable with it. You cannot get one because it looks cool, because somebody else uses it. Don't take anybody else's advice because that's what they have. You need to take whatever gun fits you. Hey, if it is a revolver, jump on it. If that's the greatest thing for you, if you have peace of mind when you settle that revolver into your hand and you go down to your target, if that's where you're most comfortable out of all these other types of guns, go with it. Again, don't listen to me. Look, the best advice that I can tell you right now is, if anyone tells you what gun is best for you, especially if that person is a spouse, but if anybody tells you what gun is best for you, ignore them. No one knows what is the best gun for you except for you. There are people out there that are willing to help you. You just have to know when too much information is too much information. I had to shoot a lot of guns before I decided what I was going to carry. That's the best advice I can give you guys. Best of luck to everyone out there, whether you are a new first-time gun owner or a seasoned gun owner out there. Let's remember that we have a lot of new gun owners out there, and gun safety is our #1 priority. While we're talking about how to do all these things with these weapons, break them down, tear them down, load them and all that, let's not forget gun safety. And remember guys, never be afraid to be the safest person in the room and the deadliest.